Right, next we have Ross McKenzie, who is an Edinburgh councillor who is broken with the corrupt and bureaucratised Labour election machine and is in position to restore socialist roots once again in Scotland. Ross?
Thank you very much. So I'm gonna be quite parochial probably after some of what we've heard. I'm very keen to give a Scottish perspective here, and from that Scottish perspective, it's actually a bloody awful time to be setting up a new Left Party. We're less than a year away from a Scottish Parliament election, and I haven't seen anything to suggest that a new party can establish itself in time to have any impact on that election, whether that's a new organisation or an electoral alliance between existing parties of the left. I've been involved in parallel discussions on both and haven't been left with a great deal of hope. However, so as you can see, some concern I may be going way off track here, but the moment for the formation of a new Left Party, the urgent necessity for a new Left Party is not something that can be planned according to the electoral cycle. So that moment is here, whether we like it or not. The moment that we're in right now is one where the Labour government has surpassed even the hardest cynics' expectations in terms of its outright Toryism. Now, I'm sure everyone here knew that Starmer's government would do nothing to deliver the redistribution of wealth and power that this country desperately needs. The redistribution of wealth and power that Labour offered in 2017 and 2019. But I certainly wasn't prepared for the level of social conservatism and militarism that we've seen from this government. So a year of that government is one reason why this moment, I think, is inevitably going to result in a new Left Party. And the other, of course, is the rise of Reform, which we've heard about. And Reform, while they're not polling at the same rates in Scotland as they are in England, they are polling worryingly high, and they are having an impact. I see on a daily basis in the area I represent, they're having an impact on public discourse. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. So yeah, again, to repeat, despite my opening remarks, I do agree that this is the moment for a new Left Party, whether we like that or not, or whether it's convenient or not. We just have to do it. I'd like to take the opportunity to talk a bit about the political landscape in Scotland that awaits this new party, because there are a few things that I think that are not always widely understood south of the border. The most important point here to make is that the PR system that we have for Scottish parliamentary elections means that the two-party system here died 26 years ago. And throughout those years, there have been viable electoral alternatives to the left of Labour. And in the form of independence, there's been an alternative to socialism for people who consider themselves part of the broader left. So it's a very different context. And the SNP, at least rhetorically, have consistently tried to place themselves just to the left of Labour throughout that devolution era. They obviously weren't able to hold that for the entirety of 2015 to 2020. But under Anas Sarwar, Scottish Labour has shifted so far to the right. I think sometimes there is a misconception in England that Scottish Labour somehow to the left of UK Labour. That has definitely not been my experience, because there was an exodus from Scottish Labour around the time of the referendum, and a lot of what was left was primarily motivated by the preservation of the Union. And actually, Corbynism had very limited purchase in Scotland. Where it did have purchase, it was in areas where there were a lot of English students. I would suggest very, very few areas saw their CLP swing to the left during the Corbyn years. And under Sarwar, Labour has shifted so far to the right that the SNP, all it has to do to tack to his left is to mitigate against specific benefit cuts and to refuse to scapegoat migrants. The very mild attempts to make taxation more progressive that we saw under Hamza Yousaf have been removed under John Sweeney's leadership, and depressingly, that is where the centre ground of Scottish politics sits less than a year out from a Holyrood election. Now, the other option to the left of Labour that has existed during the devolution era is the Scottish Greens, who are a separate party from the Green Party of England and Wales, and I would argue a substantially more radical party. The Scottish Greens in Edinburgh are at the heart of the tenants' rights movement, and the Palestine Solidarity movement, as well as obviously the climate movement. And they're the only parliamentary party who support wealth taxes, and indeed they do not support NATO membership. But for all that, as Audrey said earlier, Greens are incapable of organising in working class communities, and that is very striking in the ward that I represent. And if I have just a minute or so left, I would like to just talk a little bit about Edinburgh and specifically the area that I represent, and a couple of things that I experienced today, actually, just some small practical examples of why a left party is needed, or certainly why I, as an independent socialist councillor representing a working class area, desperately need backup from a new left party. The ward that I represent in Edinburgh is called Sighthill Gorgie. It was a Labour stronghold throughout the 20th century that has swung strongly to the SNP over the past 20 years. The ward is overwhelmingly working class. About a third of it is composed of Victorian tenements that are relatively close to the city centre, and that area is gentrifying and to some extent and contains, the likes of downwardly mobile graduates. It's very transient. The Greens do extremely well there. The tenants movement is really strong in this part of my ward. Corbyn's Labour definitely had some cut through in this area, and I don't think reform will do anything there. However, there's another third of the ward which is composed of post-war housing schemes. Some of them still owned by the council, because one of the things the SNP did while tacking slightly to Labour's left was to end the right to buy. So there is still a fair amount of council ownership in these schemes, but the public realm is absolutely dilapidated. The council is a horrendous landlord in Edinburgh. There's damp, there's mould, and in that area, the Greens, they take around 2%, and Reform clearly has a growing purchase in these schemes. I dealt with two cases there today while I was out doing my surgery. One, a janitor, and we spoke about bins and how people are leaving the bins out in the street and they're overflowing. And he went straight for extreme racist language, which he broadcast, to the entire community centre that he's a janitor of, and he did not hold back. I don't think I have heard anybody speak like that publicly until the last, say, 6 months, as Reform started to gain purchase. Another conversation I had was with a shopkeeper who has a dispute with a neighbouring shop, which has kind of encroached on his sign. They've put up a new sign, an Asian Whole Foods shop, and it's encroaching on his shop sign. And the planning department has refused to pursue this case. They said it's a civil matter, and they don't see it as a planning case. Now, as far as he's concerned, if the tables were turned and if it was an Asian shopkeeper complaining about him, then the council would come down on him like a ton of bricks, and it's two-tier Keir and all the rest of it. And he goes straight for that. And again, I really don't feel anybody in the area that I represent would be reaching for that kind of language and those types of conspiracy theories outside of, as I say, the last 6 months where Reform have really started to bounce in this area. And there's nobody around. Okay, I'm there as an independent councillor speaking to as many people as I can, but there's no political movement around telling these people a different story. There's nobody pointing out the very stark inequality and injustice of wealth inequality, in Edinburgh, it should be so clear for everybody to see. There's nobody coming with that narrative and the need for wealth taxation, the need to redistribute wealth and power, and that is, again, I'll repeat again, the reason why we desperately need a new party, whether we like it or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you very much.